Hi designers. In this video, I want to go over how to set up your document for your movie posters. If you haven't watched the Project 3 overview video yet, I want to encourage you to go watch that first, and then come back to this video as I show you how to set up your document for Photoshop. And as I mentioned in that project overview video, even though I'm showing you how to set up this document right away, you shouldn't be working in Photoshop yet. You need to go through that process of researching and brainstorming and sketching and get some good solid ideas in place before you start compositing in Photoshop. Also, in that project overview video, I kind of tell you where you can go to find out your movie poster title. So go check that out if you haven't. Otherwise, we're going to head to Photoshop and we're going to set up our new document here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm going to head to the print tab to get some of my print settings. And something that you will have seen in the project details is that the document size for this movie poster, it's a standard movie poster document size. It is 27 inches wide by 40 inches tall. So that's portrait, and that's a standard movie poster size. That's what you see when you go into the theater. Now, here's the kicker with that. I can't just type in 27 by 40, because your movie posters are more than likely going to use something that's called a bleed. And we haven't really talked about that a ton in any of your other projects. It was a concern in your billboard, but I didn't really cover it. The file was already set up for you. So I want to explain that a little bit more, what a bleed is and why we use that as we set up this document. So really, a bleed is items in your document that touch your document edge. So in this example here, the document edge is typically black. That's your also known as your trim line. And that trim line is typically black in your software. And anything that touches that trim line technically needs to bleed, which means it needs to go further. It needs to go past the trim line. So in this example here, this photograph is going to the trim line. So that actually needs to extend beyond. And this red colored box is touching the trim line. So really that needs to extend beyond. The reason we do that is mainly because things are mass printed, mass produced. You're not just necessarily printing one, you might be printing thousands, and there's not really a human behind there cutting this all out. It's all machines, and the machines aren't always perfect. And so if you don't have a little extra going beyond, and if the machine's not perfect, they may not cut exactly on the trim line, and then you could get white edges. And that's kind of what this is showing up here. You could get some white edges if the printer is off a little bit in that trimming. You might see little shades of white around the edges of your document. I would say this example here, printing without a bleed, that's more of an example if you're going to add a border around. In this case, you wouldn't need a bleed. And that's what sometimes designers will do so they can avoid having to use a bleed. Because the downside of that is you have to print on larger paper, So if a client wants something printed to 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and your design has a bleed, you technically have to print to the next size of paper so that the bleed and everything has room to print, and then it gets trimmed down to 8.5 by 11. So there's a little extra cost with that too. Where if you don't have your items touch the trim line, then you don't need a bleed and you can then print to exactly the size of paper you need. But in this case, we are going to assume you're going to have things that touch the trim line. It could be a solid color, it could be your photograph, it could be a line, it could be type, but anything that touches that trim line technically needs to extend beyond. And you usually have a bleed line then that's present. So this image kind of shows you an example of that. Illustrator is perfect. It is set up for bleeds. InDesign is perfect. It's set up for bleeds. Photoshop is not, and you're going to see that in a minute here. And those of you who are in Aaron's Illustrator class, you've probably already seen that hey, yeah, Illustrator is set up for bleeds. And if you're wondering why Photoshop isn't, is because Photoshop's really not meant for layout. It's not meant for page layout or multi-page layout. So that's why it's just not built into there. Doesn't mean we don't use it for that, but we just have to work around it. Typically, then in something like Illustrator, whatever you want to go to that trim line, the trim line is again here in the black, you would have to extend it to the bleed line, which goes past that trim line, and it would look something like this when you're done. After that gets printed, then it goes through the cutting process and it cuts on the trim line, and that bleed gets cut off. All right, so back to Photoshop. So in Photoshop, we don't have this lovely setting that says, hey, here's our trim size and here's what you should add for a bleed. Unfortunately, we have to do the math ourselves. So a typical common minimum bleed is 1/8 of an inch. That is in a decimal point, that's 0.125. And you have to remember that bleed goes all the way around, so you have to factor that in on both sides. So you have an 1/8 of an inch on one side and another 1/8 of an inch on the other side, which ends up being an extra 1/4 of an inch. So an extra 0.25. So in this case, I have to add those extra dimensions here to accommodate that bleed. So now it's going to be 27.25 and your height's going to be 40.25. And then in the end, that extra 1/8 of an inch will get trimmed off all the way around. And when you're done, your poster will be back to being 27 by 40. Um, Now the poster's pretty big at 27 by 40, and 1/8 of an inch isn't very much once it gets that big. And you're going to see that in a second. You're going to be like, wow, it's really tiny. That's because our printer that these posters are going to print to, it's a printer and a cutter. So it will print and cut all at the same time, essentially. It prints first, and then after it prints, it goes back through. It'll go back through and it'll cut. So its margin of error is very small. And so this 1/8 of an inch is plenty for this printer because it's being done all in the same machine. It's not leaving this machine to another machine. So 27.25, 40.25. Our resolution is going to stay at 300. Our color mode is CMYK. The printer we'll be using for this is a CMYK printer. And let's go ahead and hit create. And now I'm going to help you set up your grid and your guidelines, and you're going to see where your trim line will be. And you'll see then how small your bleed really is when you have a document this big. Now, I want to show you how easy that is in Illustrator for any of my Illustrator friends who are also taking that course. If I were setting this document up in Illustrator, I would specify my trim size, which in this case would have been the 27 by 40. I wouldn't have to do this math in my head. And then I would get to specify my bleed all the way around. And if I said that's 1/8 of an inch, I can hit my tab key. Those are linked. It adds it in all the way around. I don't have to do the math in my head. I just kind of say, hey, this is what I want. I'd hit create, and this is what that would look like. Zoom in here. So you'd see there's your document edge and there's your bleed line. So much nicer. So in Photoshop, yeah, you gotta think about it a little bit more. In Photoshop, it's going to be a little bit in reverse. It's going to look like this is our document edge, and we're going to put a ruler in. That kind of shows where the trim line is going to be. Okay. So we're going to set up a guide here in Photoshop to help assist you with layout and to kind of mark where this trim line is. And to do that, we're going to go View, Guides. Actually, it's not. I was looking for new guide. Oh, wait. It says I'm still an illustrator. That's why I'm like, wait, that's not right. It should say new guide layout. I need to click back into Photoshop. There we go. So I got to make sure it says Photoshop up here in the corner. View, guides, new guide layout. All right, I'm going to turn this off because yours probably doesn't look like that right now. Um, or maybe it does. If it does, you can uncheck some things or and I'll start over with this. First off, if you don't have your preview on, you can check your preview so you can see what's going on. I'm going to put in our trim line first, and I'm going to have the color of that be magenta, so that way I know this is kind of my bleed area, my trim line. And that's just a margin that I'm going to be adding for that. And it is 1/8 of an inch. I mean, I don't know how much that is in pixels. It's probably pretty darn close to 20 pixels. But I'm just going to type 1.25. The fact that it has the pixel mark there makes me think I should type in IN for inches so it gets that proper conversion. It looks like it's a little bit more. And I have to go through and type this in for all of those. So that way it's a 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And if you add the left and the right together, then that's 1/4 of an inch, 0.25. That's why we added that total dimension to our overall document size on all the way around. All right, I think that one looks good. We're going to hit OK on that because the next one's going to be separate. So that's one color. That shows us, kind of like you saw in Illustrator, this will end up being our trim line right there in that magenta. So anything beyond that line will end up getting cut off. Now it's very small, so I don't think I'd be too worried about losing any important detail. So that's one thing you do have to watch out for when you have larger bleed areas. You just don't want an important part of your picture to be getting cut off in that bleed. But this is so small, I don't think you guys are going to have to worry about that. We're going to go back to view, layout. Oh, sorry, view guides, and then new guide layout. And this time we're going to make this cyan. We're not going to do a margin, so I'm going to uncheck that, and you should see your magenta one come back. We're going to do columns. We're going to do columns and rows. And I'd like to do 6 columns and 6 rows. And I think I'd like the gutter to be about 40 pixels. Let's put 40 in there. What does that look like? Maybe let's go 50 pixels. Yeah, I think I like that a little bit better. Let's go 50 pixels. So 6 columns, 6 rows, 50 pixels. Okay, perfect. So this is called a modular grid. It's a very versatile grid for pretty much layouts that you might not be 100% sure on. Um, Especially probably with this movie poster. I mean, if I was doing a catalog or a multi-page um, document, I'd probably use a column grid. But in this case, since it's one page and I'm not quite sure, a modular grid like this is very versatile. I decided to go with a 6x6 grid because I think it breaks it down into thirds, which in design, there's something called the rule of thirds. Just like when you use your crop tool, it might have those that grid on there, and that's so that you can see the rule of thirds. Typically, the rule of thirds means you want to place your most important objects or your point of emphasis kind of in those thirds. And with this grid, you can see your thirds. Technically, you got 2 and then a line, 2 and then a line. So really, this line here is marking 1/3, and this line here is marking 1/3. And same thing with going down the other direction. You've got this line here marking 1/3, and this line here marking 1/3. Um, which if you were kind of thinking you wish you could see just those in a different color, I could go add another grid on top of this. You don't have to, but I'm just going to show you. You do not have to do this at all. I'm just going to add a different colored grid on top of this, and I'm going to say I don't think I'm actually, I think it needs to be 3. Yeah, there we go. 3. There we go. So there's kind of the rule of thirds, if I were to put that on top of there. And so really your 6 column grid has that too, only it has it broken up even more. And maybe, maybe a title is going to sit right on that third line or this third line. Maybe not. Maybe it's going to sit on this line, and that's okay too. But it could help with layout. It could help with maybe placement of some of your other objects to keep a nice, clean, margin all the way around so you don't get things too close to that trim line, because we definitely don't want things too close to that trim line. I don't think that that edge needs to be this whole area, but I don't think you should be having things getting any closer to that trim line than, visually like this. I think you need this much white space from text to the trim line. So if you're thinking you would want to use a different grid to help with that and even showing you more, some of those margin guides, I can add that back in here too. View guides, new guide layout. Let me put my margins I'll put that in a light blue. Not columns. We're going to go margins and let's say 1 inch. I just want to see what that looks like. I don't think it's going to be enough actually. It's close. I don't want rows. It's close. I feel like you could use a little bit more, actually. I'm going to go 2 inches. Yeah. It might seem like a lot to you, but in the end, I think you'll appreciate the breathing room that you're going to give around items. Remember, a grid is just a guide. You don't have to use it strictly, it's just to help you. There are some designers that like to use it to help place text and to make sure things are neat and clean and orderly. There are some designers who really only like to use a grid to give them margin guides to say, hey, keep your text outside of this area so it doesn't get too close to the trim line. Obviously, things can go past this margin guide, like your pictures and other things. It's more or less that movie title, those actor, actresses' names. Like, try to keep those in that margin guide, and that's just going to help get you a better layout. There are going to come times when this grid is absolutely annoying and you can't stand looking at it, and you're going to want to turn that off temporarily, or you might want to turn it off for a long time. And then every once in a while, might want to be like, hey, how are things fitting in my grid? You can turn that on and off by going View, Show, Guides. The shortcut key is Command semicolon on a Mac. So maybe that's Control semicolon on a PC. And that turns it off. So if I use that shortcut key, I can put it back on. So maybe you're going to design and you're going to throw out a title in here and, you know, whatever that might look like. If my computer, there we go. Apparently that's the last color I used. So let's say you do something like this. Maybe, there we go. And let's say you place it like here. And then you might be like, huh, wonder how that's fitting in my grid. Like, oh, all right. Well, now I can see it's not centered because of that grid. And I might use the grid to help center. And I'm like, okay, I am outside that margin guide. I really want to be inside that margin guide. And then I'm like, oh, I kind of sized that to fit in that whole one. I got lucky there. But, then you might be like, huh, I wonder if I were to hit this in more rule of thirds, if I'd like that title better placed here. Or maybe I'd like it better placed here, right? Maybe it'd look better there. So that's how you could use that grid. You don't have to have it on all the time, but maybe every once in a while you might be like, huh, wonder how this is fitting and working with my grid. So I would go File, Save As, I would save this into your personal space for your projects, wherever that might be. I'm using my OneDrive. So I'd get into your personal space and go ahead and save this. You can call this whatever title you drew for your movie poster. So if it was pause, you could save it as pause project or pause poster, whatever you want to save it. Save that as a PSD file for sure. One thing you might run into down the road. One thing you might run into down the road when you do go to save is you might get a message that says something like, hey, your file size is too large for a PSD file. You need to save it as a Photoshop template file. And that could happen. Sometimes these movie posters get over a gigabyte in file size because we are using 300 resolution. And so we could run into an issue with that. And if that's the case, you just got to really manage your layers, clean them up, group things into folders, maybe merge some layers together that you don't need to have separate anymore, to help with that file size. And if that does become an issue for you, message me, email me, and I will help walk you through that. I'm probably going to have to get creative when you turn this project in for grade because I'm going to guess these file sizes will be too large for Schoology. So, but we will worry about that when we get there. Otherwise, with your new document set up, when you are ready and you have your idea, you will begin. And as I mentioned in the intro video, I'm going to be doing an activity next week where we do a movie poster together. So you might be able to see some of these things like the grid and other aspects of the movie poster being done with getting the movie credits in there and some other pieces. So stay tuned for that. You'll definitely want to make sure you take part in that activity. Otherwise, that's it for today.